I was holding a pen that felt heavier than my entire life's work. And I didn't know yet that one careless signature would have handed everything I built to people quietly waiting for me to die. Before I tell you how close I came to ruining my own legacy, let me take you back a few days to the moment everything truly began. My name is Edwin Calloway. I'm 74 years old. I built my logistics company from the ground up with nothing but grit, borrowed money, and years of sleepless nights. I buried my wife long ago, never had children of my own, and these days my body reminds me, often and without mercy, that time doesn't negotiate. That's why I was standing at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta, gripping the edge of a baggage carousel, feeling the exhaustion hit me like a wave. Flying used to be easy. I once crossed the country 3 times a week and still went straight into meetings. Now a 3-hour flight felt like I'd aged another year. The air was stale. Voices echoed. People rushed past me with purpose, phones glued to their ears, dragging their futures behind them in rolling suitcases. And there I was, waiting. I was always the last one waiting, last bag on the belt. Like the universe's little reminder that I didn't belong to the fast world anymore. This trip had already been a waste. I'd flown out to meet potential buyers for my company. Big firms, big promises, bigger smiles. The kind that talk about long-term vision while quietly counting down how long you have left to live. They knew about my illness, stage 4 lung cancer. A year, maybe less. That kind of news doesn't stay private when money's involved. To them, I wasn't a businessman anymore. I was a ticking clock. They stalled on purpose. Board approvals, audits, next quarter projections, every excuse in the book. They were waiting for me to get weak enough to accept scraps. But I wasn't ready to fold. Not yet. When my black suitcase finally appeared, red tag flashing like a signal flare, I stepped forward and suddenly felt a small tug on my suit jacket. I turned around. A little girl stood there, maybe 10 years old, thin, a denim jacket hanging off her shoulders like it belonged to someone else, sneakers worn down at the soles, and eyes, sharp, steady, far too old for her face. "Please, sir," she said quietly. "Can I help you?" I frowned. Airports are full of people asking for money, but something about her was different. No whining, no act, just calm. "Let go, kid," I said. "I need my bag." "I'll get it," she replied. Before I could stop her, she slipped through the crowd, grabbed my heavy suitcase like she'd done it 1,000 times before, and dragged it back to me. "There," she said. "That one's yours." I stared at her. People who beg don't work first. They ask, they pressure. They don't lift 40-pound suitcases for free. "Thank you," I said, pulling a 20 from my wallet. She took it, but she didn't walk away. Instead, she looked straight at me and asked, "Do you need more help?" I let out a dry chuckle. "That's a strange question." "You're tired," she said. "You were traveling for work, and it didn't go the way you planned." That one landed deep. I grabbed my suitcase and started toward the exit. I didn't need a child peeling layers off my life, but she walked right beside me. "Take me with you," she said softly. I stopped dead. "What?" "Take me with you," she repeated. "I won't be trouble. And I promise you won't regret it." I laughed because the alternative was admitting how serious she sounded. "Kid, do you even hear yourself? Where are your parents?" "I don't have any," she said calmly. "My name is Nora Bell. I've been living here for 3 months." That's when I realized something important. Whatever mistake I thought I was about to make, walking away would have been the worst one. If you've ever stood at a moment where doing the right thing felt dangerous, stay with me. And if stories about hard choices and unexpected turns speak to you, you might want to subscribe now. Because what happened next didn't just change her life, it saved mine. I should have walked away. Every sensible voice in my head told me to grab my suitcase, call a cab, and forget that little girl ever existed. That's what most people would have done. That's what I'd done my whole life. Move forward, don't look back. But something about the way Nora Bell said her name stopped me. Not begging, not trembling, just stating a fact like she'd already accepted that the world wasn't going to be kind to her. 3 months, I said, lowering my voice. You're telling me you've been living in this airport for 3 months, she nodded. I sleep where it's quiet. I help people with their bags. They give me a few dollars. I eat at the food court. I wash up in the bathrooms. I looked around instinctively. Security carts, cameras, uniforms everywhere. And nobody's noticed you, I asked. They notice, she said. They just don't bother me. As long as I'm quiet and don't cause problems. That answer sat heavy in my chest. A 10-year-old had figured out how to become invisible. I shook my head. Listen, Nora, you're smart. I can see that. But I can't take you with me. That's not how life works. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. Instead, she said something that made my stomach tighten. Tomorrow there's a new head of security starting, she said. I heard the guards talking. He's strict. He's clearing everyone out who doesn't belong. I frowned. And when they find me, they'll put me in a state home. I'm not going back to one of those. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands clenched the straps of her backpack so tight her knuckles went white. Why me? I asked quietly. There are thousands of people in this airport. She looked up at me. Because you're alone. That stung more than it should have. And because you have a big meeting coming up, she added. I froze. How would you know that? I heard you on the phone, she said. You were talking about buyers, about needing serious people instead of time wasters. I remembered the call. I'd been pacing near the gate, arguing with my lawyer, frustration bleeding into every word. And what does that have to do with you? I asked. She took a small step closer. A man with a granddaughter looks different than a lonely old man. People trust him more. They think he's careful, responsible. For a second, I almost laughed. A 10-year-old child was pitching me a business strategy. That's a hell of a plan, I said slowly. But it's illegal and dangerous, and frankly insane. She didn't flinch. I have papers, she said, pulling a folded document from her backpack. My birth certificate. I took it from her, expecting something fake. It wasn't. Original seal, official records, parents deceased, only guardian and aunt gone a year ago. I exhaled slowly. You understand I'm not promising you anything, I said. I'm not adopting you, I'm not saving you. I know, she replied, just for the meeting. After that, you can put me somewhere safe. I looked at her for a long time. She wasn't begging. She was negotiating. And that scared me more than anything else. I thought about my meeting in 3 days. My last real chance to sell the company on my terms before my health made decisions for me. I thought about how the buyers already smelled blood in the water. And I thought about what kind of man I'd be if I walked away from a child who had figured out the world faster than it ever should have forced her to. All right, I said finally, just temporarily. We do this legally through my lawyer, no games. Her eyes didn't explode with joy, they softened. Thank you, she said quietly. As we walked out into the humid Atlanta night together, I felt something shift inside me, like I just stepped onto a road I hadn't planned to walk. If you're still with me, tap like right now. Because what I thought was a calculated risk was actually the beginning of the most important decision of my life. The moment we stepped outside, the humid Atlanta air wrapped around us like a heavy blanket. Nora stayed close to my side, not touching me now, just matching my pace like she was afraid one wrong move would make me change my mind. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer. Daniel, I said when he picked up, I've got a situation, and before you say anything, yes, I'm serious. There was a pause on the other end. I could already picture him rubbing his forehead. I'm listening, he said carefully. There's a child with me, 10 years old, no parents, no guardian. She's been living in the airport. I need to know what I can legally do for a few days, nothing permanent. Silence. Then a slow exhale. Edwin, are you trying to give me a heart attack? I need answers, not judgment. All right, he said. If she's with you voluntarily, not reported missing, and you're not making long-term decisions, you can act as a temporary escort. Temporary, that means food, shelter, supervision, nothing more. I closed my eyes. Can I bring her to a business meeting? That's a gray area, he replied. If no one questions it, fine. If someone does and thinks you're lying about guardianship, you could be in serious trouble. I looked at Nora. She stood there quietly, clutching her backpack, eyes fixed on the ground like she was already preparing herself to be sent away. Draft something, I said. An affidavit, temporary care. I'll come to your office tomorrow, Daniel sighed. Edwin, you're sick. You don't need complications right now. I know, I said. But I also know when I'd regret walking away. When I hung up, Nora finally looked up at me. So, she asked. We do this by the book, I said. Tomorrow we see my lawyer, you behave, you listen. And you understand this ends after the meeting. She nodded. I understand. We hailed a cab. The driver glanced at us, an old man and a quiet little girl, and didn't give us a second look. Just another pair disappearing into the city. Nora watched the lights blur past the window. I watched her reflection in the glass. You're not scared? I asked. I am, she said honestly. But being scared here is better than being scared alone. That sentence followed me all the way home. The house was quiet when we arrived. Too quiet. It always was. I showed her the guest room, handed her clean towels, and told her to wash up. When she came back out, hair damp, shoulders finally relaxed, something about the place felt different. Less empty. We ate in silence. She thanked me for every bite like it mattered. That night, as she disappeared into the guest room and softly said, "Good night, grandfather," I sat alone at the kitchen table and realized something unsettling. I hadn't just taken a risk for a business meeting. I'd invited a stranger into the last chapter of my life. If you're wondering whether this was a mistake, stay with me. And if you believe some risks are worth taking, make sure you're subscribed. Because the next few days would test every decision I thought I understood. The next morning came faster than I wanted it to. I woke up before the alarm, chest tight, lungs burning in that familiar way doctors pretend not to notice. For a moment, I forgot she was there. Then I heard soft footsteps down the hall. Careful, quiet, like she was afraid the floor itself might betray her. Nora stood in the doorway, backpack already on, hair still damp from washing it in the sink. "Good morning," she said. I nodded. "Morning." We drove to my lawyer's office in Buckhead just after 9. Tall building, polished glass. The kind of place that smells like money and certainty. Nora sat straight in the passenger seat, hands folded, eyes forward. She wasn't looking around like a child seeing something new. She was studying, memorizing. Daniel Brooks greeted us with raised eyebrows and a long stare. "So," he said slowly, crouching to Nora's eye level, "you must be the young lady causing my blood pressure to spike." She smiled politely. "I'm sorry, sir." He blinked, then laughed despite himself. "All right, let's talk." He asked her the questions he had to ask. If she was there by choice, if anyone was looking for her, if she understood this was temporary. She answered calmly, clearly, better than most adults I'd seen in that chair. 20 minutes later, the papers were printed, stamped, signed. Temporary care. Legal. Clean. When we walked out, Daniel pulled me aside. "Edwin," he said quietly, "this meeting you've got coming up, it's your last real leverage. You don't rush. You don't let anyone pressure you. Understand?" "I understand." He glanced at Nora. "She's sharp." I noticed. The next 2 days were spent preparing. I bought her clothes, nothing flashy, simple, clean, a navy dress, flat shoes, a light sweater. I told her to speak only when spoken to keep answers short, to stay close to me. She absorbed every word. Remember, I said, you're my granddaughter, you live with me. School questions stay vague. She nodded. I won't say more than necessary. At night, I caught myself watching her read on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, completely silent. The house didn't feel like a museum anymore. It felt lived in. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, papers spread out, numbers blurring together. Nora padded in quietly and sat across from me. "You're nervous," she said. I smiled faintly. "Business does that." "You're not just nervous," she said. "You're tired." That one landed deep. "If this deal goes wrong," she added, "what happens to you?" I didn't answer right away. "I don't know," I said finally. "That's why it has to go right." She nodded like she understood far more than she should. "We'll do our best," she said. The word stayed with me long after she went back to her room. Because the next day wasn't just about contracts and numbers anymore. It was about whether I'd let exhaustion make my final decision for me, or whether I'd still have the strength to walk away. And that question would be answered very soon. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt longer than the flight itself. My ears popped, my chest tightened, and I could feel my pulse in my temples. Nora stood close to me, hands folded, eyes forward, calm on the outside, watching everything. The doors opened to white marble floors and glass walls that looked down on the city like it was something to be owned. We were led into a boardroom that smelled like polished wood and quiet power. Long table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything designed to make a man feel small if he wasn't careful. A few minutes later, Richard Morton walked in, confident smile already fixed in place. His wife, Elaine Morton, followed, sharp eyes, controlled posture, laptop tucked under her arm like a shield. "Edwin," Richard said warmly, shaking my hand. "Good to see you again." His gaze shifted to Nora. "And who is this young lady?" "My granddaughter," I said evenly. "Nora." Elaine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How lovely. Family is everything, isn't it?" Nora nodded politely and said nothing. We took our seats. Nora sat beside me, feet not quite touching the floor, hands folded just like I'd taught her. Perfect. The meeting began smoothly. Too smoothly. Compliments, praises, how impressive my company was, how strong the numbers looked, how much they respected what I'd built, every sentence wrapped in silk. Elaine pulled up the contract on her screen and started reading terms. Percentages, timelines, payment structure, all reasonable, all clean on the surface. I followed along, pen resting between my fingers. Minutes passed, then more. My vision started to blur. A dull ache spread behind my eyes. I shifted in my chair, trying not to show it. Weakness is blood in the water. "We believe it's best to sign today," Richard said casually. "No reason to drag things out." Daniel, my lawyer, stiffened. "This is a substantial agreement. We need time." Elaine smiled thinly. "Of course, but we've already discussed everything. Trust is important in partnerships." Trust, that word again. I looked down at the page Daniel had flagged earlier. Dense language, too dense. My head throbbed harder. Elaine slid the contract closer to me. "Just initial here and here, then we can wrap this up." The pen felt heavy in my hand. My breathing slowed. My body was screaming for rest, for an end. I could feel them watching me, waiting. Nora hadn't moved the entire time, but I felt her attention shift, sharp, focused. Like she'd sensed something before I did. As I leaned forward to sign, she quietly tugged my sleeve. "Grandfather," she said softly, "can I have some water?" Elaine stood quickly. "Of course, sweetheart." While she stepped out, I stared at the contract again. Something didn't sit right. Why the rush? Why today? Why now? If you've ever been pushed to decide when you were tired and vulnerable, tap like right now, because pressure is never an accident. Elaine returned with the water. Nora thanked her, took a small sip, then placed the glass down and looked straight at the contract. I lifted the pen again, and that's when she spoke. Not loud, not emotional, just one calm question. A question that would stop everything. The room was silent except for the low hum of the city outside the glass walls. I had the pen in my hand, one stroke away from ending everything. Then Nora spoke. "Grandfather," she said quietly, her voice steady, "what happens if you get really sick or if you die?" The words landed like a dropped plate. Elaine froze. Richard's smile tightened. Daniel lifted his head slowly. I turned toward Nora. "Why would you ask that?" She didn't look scared. She didn't look confused. "I heard them say something about time," she said, "and about protections. I just want to understand. No child should have been thinking like that, but she was." Richard cleared his throat. "That's not really something a child needs to worry about." Daniel leaned forward. "Actually, it's a fair question." Elaine's fingers tapped once on her laptop. Just once. Controlled. Nervous. I slid the contract back toward myself. My fatigue lifted just enough for instinct to kick in. That old instinct that had built my company from nothing. "Daniel," I said, "read the clause you were concerned about, out loud, slowly." The lawyer nodded and opened the document. "In the event of the seller's death within 180 days of signing," he read, "all remaining payments shall be nullified. Ownership transfers fully to the buyer without further financial obligation." The room went cold. I felt my stomach drop. I looked at Richard. "So if I die in 6 months, you keep my company and stop paying?" Richard spread his hands. "It's standard risk management." Elaine avoided my eyes. "You knew," I said quietly. "You knew about my health." "That's not true," Elaine said too quickly. Then Nora spoke again. "So if he dies," she said calmly, "you win." No anger, no accusation, just truth. Richard's face drained of color. "Child, this is an adult conversation," Elaine snapped. "No," I said, my voice steady now. "This is exactly the conversation." Daniel closed the contract. "Remove the clause," he said. "Right now." Silence. Finally Richard shook his head. "We can't, our investors won't allow it." That was the answer. They weren't buying my company. They were betting on my death. I pushed the pen away. "There will be no deal," I said. Elaine stood abruptly. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I replied. "But it won't be my last one." They gathered their things and walked out without another word. When the door closed, I sat back, exhausted but clear. Daniel exhaled. "You just saved yourself." I looked down at Nora. "No," I said softly, "she did." Nora's hands were shaking now. The moment had passed and the weight of it hit her all at once. "You weren't mad," she whispered. I put my arm around her shoulders. "You asked the only question that mattered." If a single honest question has ever saved you from a bad decision, hit subscribe right now. Because what I chose to do after that meeting mattered even more than the deal itself. When we stepped out of that building, the air felt different. Lighter, like I just walked away from a grave I didn't know was already dug. Nora stayed close to me as we waited for the car. Her small hand wrapped around my sleeve, not out of fear this time, but out of relief. I could feel her shaking just a little. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded. "I thought you might be angry." I shook my head slowly. "I've been in business for 50 years. No one's ever protected me the way you just did." On the drive home, I didn't say much. My body was exhausted, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. I hadn't sold the company. I hadn't secured the money, but I had kept my dignity. And for the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't thinking about what I was losing. I was thinking about what I could still give. That night after dinner, I called Daniel. "I'm not selling," I told him. "Not to vultures." He didn't argue. He already knew. Instead, I told him what I wanted to do next. I wanted Nora safe, educated, protected. I wanted her future locked in tight no matter what happened to me. A guardian, a school, a trust that no one could touch. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Edwin," he said finally, "this is the smartest decision you've made in years." The paperwork moved fast, faster than any deal ever had. Maybe because this time it wasn't about money. A few weeks later, I watched Nora walk into her new school with a backpack that wasn't frayed, shoes that fit, and a future that wasn't uncertain anymore. She turned around at the door and waved at me, smiling like she finally believed she belonged somewhere. I waved back, holding myself together the best I could. My health didn't magically improve. Time still did what time always does, but my days felt full now. Purpose has a way of making pain quieter. Years later, long after I was gone, Nora would stand on her own 2 feet, educated, strong, helping other children who felt invisible just like she once did. I didn't leave behind the biggest company. I didn't close the richest deal, but I left behind something better, a life that mattered because it changed another one. If this story stayed with you, do me a small favor. Like the video so more people hear it. Subscribe if you believe one decision can change generations. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. Because sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what you build for yourself. It's who you protect when no one else will.